To continue with Bishop's Crusoe in England, this is quite a long poem, and quite often for your exams, certain excerpts would come, if not the entire poem. So now we are going on into the next para. Because I didn't know enough. Why didn't I know enough of something? Greek drama or astronomy? The books I'd read were full of blanks. Now, here we see that Bishop's Crusoe is sitting and wondering, why didn't I know enough of something? Now, these are the thoughts, these are all the thoughts that are coming to him on the island. So, here we see that he is in England, he has been rescued, he's sitting there, and with, on one hand, nostalgia, on the other hand, a fear, or rather, he cannot believe that he has really come out of such a situation. He is going back and thinking about his life on the island. And from the island, he would wonder, why didn't I know enough of something? Greek drama, astronomy. The books I'd read were full of blanks. So here we see Bishop bringing in her own feelings of how her own self was not projected in any of the books that she read. So we see all along the poem there is a quest for identity. She is constantly on the search to fit in. She says, why didn't I know deeply of something? If I could only forget myself in Greek drama or astronomy. So again, this is all said in the voice of the castaway Crusoe. The books I read were full of blanks, which means there was not enough explanation for the questions she wanted. There were blanks. The poems, well, I read, I tried reciting to my iris beds. So once again we see it is stressed that Crusoe has no company. He is reciting his poems to the flowers, the farm, the work on his land. That is where he is reciting this poem. He is all alone. They flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of. And here he stops. He cannot remember the next word. What is the word that is following? Bliss. The bliss of what? One of the first things I did was I got back and I looked it up. She says that the first thing I did when I got back in England was to look up Wordsworth's poem. What was that word which I forgot on the island? And the word we all know is bliss of solitude. So here there is irony. Irony is used here. Solitude, according to Wordsworth, was something very beautiful. Wordsworth lives a normal life. He goes out for a solitary walk and he sees these beautiful daffodils. And later on, in a vacant or pensive mood, when he sits alone, they flash upon that inward eye and he is filled with bliss. But can solitude be a bliss for Robinson Crusoe? It would be a cruel joke to say that solitude would be something that Crusoe wants. All that he has is solitude. In fact, he would rather not have this loneliness, not have this time to give himself up to so much introspection. Dreams were the worst. Of course, I dreamt of food and love, but they were pleasant rather than otherwise. But then I dream of things like slitting a baby's throat, mistaking it for a baby goat. So now Bishop says dreams are the worst. Now we feel more and more that the poet is talking about herself. She says that dreams are horrible because they are carrying her or making her knock on doors that she would rather leave unopened. So sometimes I dream of love and food. Crusoe is dreaming of love, food. They are pleasant dreams. In his dream, he would be enjoying a cup of tea, a homemade meal, and or love, the love of his close relatives, a woman he loves. But these dreams, the dream like slitting a baby's throat, mistaking it for a baby goat, I'd have nightmares of other islands stretching away from mine, infinities of island, islands spawning islands. So sometimes he dreamt of, the aloneness gave rise to the feeling of a great many islands, islands that need to be crossed, that needed to be conquered, that needed to be trekked on in order to find the self. Islands spawning islands like frogs' eggs turning into polywogs of islands. So these islands were giving rise to new islands like a swarm of frogs' eggs were turning very quickly into tadpoles swimming in a rush that were turning into frogs. So the very cycle of life is presented here. And the author feels that there has so many islands or so much to be conquered in order to understand the self. Knowing that I had to live on each and every one eventually for ages, registering their flora, their fauna, their geography. So the person or the human being had to live all the roles that life gives. Every role, every place, every memory, every single occurrence, there is no backing out of it. There is no backing out of any situation. You have to go through it. You have to go through the tunnel of life, experiencing everything. And that is both pain and pleasure. And she says, I have to register every flora, every fauna. Life itself is becoming tedious for the author here. Just when I thought I couldn't stand it another minute longer, Friday came. So when the author or Robinson Crusoe felt that he couldn't stand another moment of loneliness, another moment of dejection, Friday came along. Accounts of that have everything all wrong. Friday was nice. Friday was nice and we were friends. If only he had been a woman. If only Friday had been a woman. I wanted to propagate my kind. And so did he, I think, poor boy. He'd pet the baby goats sometimes and race with them or carry one around. We know that Crusoe at a certain point is saving Friday from the cannibals, and Friday becomes his very devoted servant and friend, his only companionship in the island before they were discovered. So here Crusoe is telling us that everybody has given various versions of myself and Friday, but they are not right. They are all wrong. Nobody has got it right of my true relationship with Friday. I wanted to propagate my kind. So here we see Crusoe is wishing for a sexual union, a love which is would result in him having a family, of having children, of having to be able to propagate his kind. And he says that Friday too wished the same. Friday would be petting the little goat. Sometimes he'd carry a goat around. That nurturing feeling, that love was present in Friday too. Did he too dream of one day having a family? Pretty to watch, he had a pretty body. So now we come to a line where Crusoe is describing Friday's body as something sensual, something desirable. And then one day they came and took us off. And abruptly here we see that one day the ship came in. They saved us. They took us off. Did they want to be saved? So finally we see that this poem, we can say, is really an excursion through memory. All the things that are described here, nothing is happening in England. Everything was what once happened on the island. So in a way, Crusoe is living or giving meaning to his existence through memories. So we can call this poem a eulogy or elegy of memory. Uh, it is memory that is being celebrated. The memory that Crusoe alone has and which he alone can give life to. If he were not to speak of this island no longer lives. Nobody else has ever lived on it. Nobody else has experienced what he has experienced. Here the poet is, I feel that the poet is trying to tell us that each person's experiences or thoughts are unique to themselves, their relationships with other people, These are all carried on in memory, and memory is both a cultural, a collective thing which all of us have. At the same time, it is individual, pertaining to a particular person. A person's memory of a childhood home, which is long since, it is no longer there. The house has been erased, the path has been erased, something new has been built there. And then that house, that cottage, that childhood home, or those relatives, they live only in our memory. Can you imagine how profound that is? That those people are no longer of flesh and blood, but existing solely in the memory of one human being. And the day that person dies, that memory too is erased. So this is actually existence through memory, we can say. Elizabeth Bishop was a poet who, all through her life, lived rather on the margin. She was a woman poet. She never got married. At a very young age, that is, even at the age of 1, she lost her father, which drove her mother into an asylum, a mental asylum. And this lady was there for the rest of her life. And we see that Elizabeth Bishop was never reunited with her mother, who at a very early age or at the death of the father was taken away to the asylum, such that this little child was left in the care first of her maternal grandparents, who raised her, and later on with her paternal grandparents. So there are a lot of transitions here. She was in Nova Scotia at a young age. Later, she was in Massachusetts. So everywhere we see that she was trying to fit in, trying to belong. And later on in university, she met Marianne Moore, the very popular, famous poet, who inspired her to write poetry. She was, in fact, headed towards medical school, which she gave up. So, throughout her life, there was this quest of who I should become, or what is the identity that I should embrace. And she did a great deal of traveling. And in those travels, too, she was always seeking a meaning to existence. She has written only 101 poems in her lifetime, but she is known as one of the most famous American poets. She taught at the Harvard University for more than 7 years. And we see that a very important period of her life was spent in Brazil, where she lived with her lover, Lota Macedo Soares, a Brazilian architect. And this lady built her a cabin, a home in her huge uh, estate of acres of land in which only these two women were present. And they lived a life of such passion and love that, there was so much creativity there. But she was also the victim of substance abuse. And this poem was written when she lost Lotta, who whom she had to leave. She here in her autobiography, she says that she had to move back to America because she could no longer stay in this relationship, for she was seeing that her partner was undergoing such deep level of a neurosis, such that it is said that Lotta finally came to visit Bishop, and she takes on an overdose of drugs and kills herself. She commits suicide. And so this loneliness, this feeling towards a person of the same gender, so all this is what prompted her to write this deeply personal poem, Robinson Crusoe, in which, by using the voice of somebody who was cast away, she is showing us how a female writer whose sensual sexual orientation was not heterosexual, not the main thing, not something on the periphery, something marginalized. So to be unmarried, to live a life without the usual, the path that is given for a woman of her time, the very lines that I dream like that I was slitting the throat of a baby, mistaking it for a goat. So here we see the pangs of childbirth. So this is again a woman who was not able to propagate her kind. She did not have children or a spouse. And at the same time, we see that throughout her life, she vehemently refused to write or speak about homosexuality. She refused to talk about the same gender affection, or such. She was not ready to be placed in any anthology that was all female. Very vehemently, very strongly, she refused to be identified in such a role, but she lived such a role. And so she constantly felt marginalized, and that is why those questions she asks are, am I responsible for the state I am in? But the passion that she had for Lotta was something that consumed her, we can say. And she wrote some of her best poetry when they were together. And there is a very famous movie, Over the Moon, which is a Brazilian movie made about the architect Lotta and Elizabeth Bishop. But when Bishop realized that she would be sucked in or consumed by this passion, she had no other alternative but to leave her partner. And that is, here we see with Friday, such a feeling. We can see that it is at last when Crusoe meets Friday that finally he is getting companionship in a world which is geographically and sexually cut off from the rest of the world. He meets Friday, a man. He wishes that was a woman. So, Crusoe's state is comparable to her in the real world. In a way, in the real world, she was a castaway. So, these are all feelings that we have upon reading this work. So, we could say that this is a deeply personal poem in which the artist has taken so much care not to give out any personal detail, to make it so subtle that it is all in the voice of a male. It is a heterosexual narrative. And though there is an innuendo of homosexuality between Crusoe and Friday, that too is not described. And again, the colonizer and the colonized, this also comes to our mind. The codependence of human beings. Defoe's Crusoe teaches Friday to call him master. And at the same time, here we see that Crusoe does not stand in the position of a master. There is a codependence between two human beings they need to depend on each other. And was it master or was it friend? So these are all deep issues that we need to think about. And one day they took us off. Now, towards the end of the poem, Bishop also describes how Friday dies of measles, or he's taken back to England and he's unable to adjust to the climate there. There too, we see the other in opposition to the one. Whereas Crusoe survives with the guilt of the survivor, Friday dies when he is taken away from his comfort. So here too, we see that when her partner dies, there is the guilt of the survivor, and yet there is nothing she can do except keep her friend alive in her memories. So this is purely an existence based on memory. So one of the most important words we can use for this poem is memory. Thank you.